Greetings, Africans on the continent, and greetings, global Africa, all over the world. This is King H. I came across another intriguing article, even though this article is a little bit late, but it's something that is actually continuously going on. France on strike, power cuts, school shut, no Eiffel Tower. This was written by Associate Press on December 17, 2019. But the fact is this, the reason why I'm bringing this discussion is because, French Africans need to observe what is happening in France so that they can learn and replicate what they learn on what is happening on French Africa on the ground. Because France colonized most of the African countries that speak French, or if not all of the African countries that speak French. But French Africans are not learning from what France and the people of France are doing when it comes to government or governing in their country, when it comes to the power that the president of France has over the people, and the people of France will rise and have strikes, protest against the government. So this is what French Africa must learn from France. So the French union activists cut electricity to nearly 100,000 homes and offices in this protest, or this, actually happened around December the 5th, which was not too long ago, and it still continues. I'll give another session of what I actually read based on what happened. All this was done to stop the government from raising the retirement age of 64. French Africa, what is the retirement age for the presidents of all of the 14 countries in Africa that speak French? They don't have any retirement age. Well, they have retirement age on people who are working in the government. But when it comes to the presidents, they abuse that. When it comes to the French African leaders, they abuse it. You have people in their 70s, in their 80s, and even in their 90s who don't want to get out of the presidency, who don't know what to do when it comes to government and ruling the people. Yet they want to sit on that powerful seat called the presidency, and enjoy what the presidency has to give. All the glory, all the power, all the wealth. They just want to enjoy it at the age of 70, 80, and 90, and they want to step down. So French Africa, from Togo, as you've been doing, you need to intensify what is happening in Togo. All over the other French African countries, Benin, you must stand up. Central Africa, we all the French African nations must stand up, because if we don't do anything to change what is happening in the land of Africa, nothing will change. The people in power will still stay in power and continue to do what they have been doing. Although, if you want to compare how protests and strikes happen in the Western world and what happens in Africa, is completely two different things. Because when you protest in France, most of the people don't get arrested or get killed by the police. As a matter of fact, the police force are actually in support of the strike. So the police force also participate in the strike when people demand for strike against the government. Unlike what's happening in Africa, in most countries in Africa, even not all countries in Africa, when the people protest, what happens? The president, the leaders, the governors, you name it, they all send the military to come and gun down and use military force on their own people. In this case, precisely, I would say I will talk about Southern Cameroon and like Republic of Cameroon. When um, lawyers decided to protest, what happened? They were beaten and jailed. When the teachers also did, they were, you know, they sent the military against them, and people were killed to the point where we are at war with La Republic because the president of La Republic of Cameroon, President Paul Biya, the tyrant, the dictator, the man with all the powers who display hegemony over the people of Southern Cameroon. All he does is what? Kill and send his soldiers. As if actually, when he made his speech uh, prior to New Year, he's gonna focus more on killing Southern Cameroonians. And he's gonna get away with it because France supports La République de Cameroon, supports President Paul Biya. But you don't see the people of France being killed when they protest. 100,000 homes were shut down with lights by French Union activists. But you don't see none of them being killed. But when it comes to Africa, when our people decide to rise, and our people must rise, they must rise because we must change what's happening in the entire continent of Africa. The youths must be involved in this change because if you're not involved, well, then you'll be left out. And the change will not be, will not happen, will not take place. France is a big problem. When all this protest was happening in France, where was Macron? He didn't do shit. He left and went back to Africa so that he could put his hand in what is happening in the eco currency so that he can have some leverage, some control, so that he can make more monies and support his people in France. You can see how the action and reaction of what France does and how it affects Africa. We must really kick France out of Africa completely. Ban them. It's a movement to kick them out because what they have been doing for the past 500 years that they have been in Africa is to rip off, exploit. In the process, our own people are dying while they benefit. This protest happened in France and crippled the train for 13 days. For 13 days, everything was shut down. But President Macron didn't do nothing. And the retirement reform brought them. The retirement reform brought the people together to strike against the government and the hegemony of the government on the people. So 14 nations in Africa, although 8 of them are now part of the eco currency, but guess what? France had to get involved so that it could be pegged to euro currency so that they will benefit from our struggle. France owes 14 nations, and including Southern Cameroon, reparations. This is what the people of Africa, of all the 14 nations, including Southern Cameroon, must fight and gain reparation from France. And also, Southern Cameroons must fight and get reparation from Britain for colonization. We cannot allow these people's action that has demolished, destroyed the lives of Africans for over 500 years go scot-free. When Nazis, the Germans, killed the Jews, the Germans still had to pay reparations for their action. Why can't we demand reparation from France that still exploit us? to this day. They have the audacity to still come. The president of France has the audacity to still come and intervene in the West African eco currency. That must change. It must. Africa must stand on its own 2 feet. We cannot allow. Look at what the people of France are doing. This is what the 14 nations in Africa must do. Must rise. Kick France. We have to stop France. We have to stop doing business with France for some amount of years so that we can regroup and regain our sovereignty and so that we can grow as a continent. But so long as France is still pecking, so long as France is still putting their hands, their influences in what is happening in Africa, Africa and the 14 nations that speak French will never truly see freedom. Will never truly see freedom. I have something else to add when it comes to the strike. The French Union have called for 2 more national days of protest and strikes against the government pension reforms on Thursday, January 9th, and January 11th of 2020. So in the near future, they will still be having protests against the government, the government of France. The French people are protesting, and you will not see 1 people killed. But when African people decide to protest in all of Africa, when they decide to rise and protest, what does the government of Africa do to the people? They shoot, they arrest, they do all kinds of dehumanization towards their own people. And France and Britain does nothing. They instead support the government. This is the conundrum that we Africa are facing, which is why we must really do away with European influences and imperialism in Africa. From the British to France and all colonizers, Africa must be truly free from the chokeholds of European superiority. You see, the thing is, Europeans or Western world see themselves as gods that have to interfere in African business and African way of life. They must say something about what is happening. They must be involved in what is happening. They must have some control, some influence, like gods over the people of Africa. That's why we are still slaves. Globally, black people are still slaves and will still remain slaves unless they stand together with one voice and speak. That is the only way we will change. And the economy of Africa must be controlled by Africans on the continent and globally. This is the key for Africans to have respect in the world, because we are the most disrespected people in this planet, on this earth, on this universe. We are the most disrespected people, which is why you see so many blacks, male, female, and male, running to have kids with other races. because they look down on themselves as inferior. That's a way to feel superior when they have mixed kids or multiracial kids. That would take away the African spirituality, African godliness. The way God created us, the way nature created us is godliness. So I cannot run away from who I am. I am African and I am proud to be black. Just like the great Marcus Garvey. This is King H. The revolution continues. We must promote Pan-Africanism, global Pan-Africanism on the continent and in the world. Till next time.